So you sort of alluded to a little bit how opponents to your view will bring up the God of the Gaps rebuttal. And they would say that just because we can't explain certain things doesn't mean we can just stick a creator in there. And that's what we're doing. It's sort of wishful thinking. And it's also, I've heard it called lazy science by certain scientists because we're not trying to figure out the true cause of things. We're just sort of sticking God in there. So what would you have to say in response to that?
Well, a number of things. Number one, I'm a Catholic, and I had never heard the phrase "God of the Gaps" before I wrote my book. So it's not because I was trying to do anything, make any particular point about God. It's just that, as I argued or as I explained, this is how we conclude that something is designed. And additionally, well, a couple of things. Number one, saying that, this guy's being lazy and you're not working hard to discover how evolution really made life begs the question because you're assuming that a designer did not make it. And if you decide that you won't accept a designer, then it's always going to be the case that somebody who does conclude that is, in your mind, being lazy.
Hmm.
Additionally, it is not ignorance that this same argument is, or the same label is sometimes called the argument from ignorance. That is, I can't think of a way that these could be put together by some evolutionary unintelligent process. So it must have been designed. It's not ignorance that allows us to conclude they were designed. It is knowledge. It is the discoveries of modern science that show the sophisticated arrangement of parts in the cell. It was a whole lot easier to think that Darwin's theory might be true when we didn't know anything about the cell, as Darwin did not. And in the early parts of the 20th century, when nobody knew what carried genetic information, they didn't know with sugar molecules or proteins, or people thought DNA was just a structural component of the cell. It has been through the progress of science where we've discovered molecular machines and genetic information and translation and transcription and all these things associated in our everyday world with, intelligence. That has allowed us to conclude that these things are designed. So one more point, I'm getting on a roll here. One more point. One more point is that there have been times in the past where people have proposed an explanation that that other folks thought had philosophical implications. And what's more, the proposers couldn't tell a mechanism or how such a thing could happen, that have turned out to be accepted and turned out to be correct. And one is Isaac Newton, way back in the 1500s, proposed his theory of gravity, where two bodies attracted each other through space. And that struck many scientists of the time as some spooky, supernatural activity. It was thought then that two bodies had to hit each other before there could be an effect. And nonetheless, over time, scientists came around and decided, hey, this works and it explains some things, and they accepted it. And the other more modern example is the Big Bang theory. Back in the 1930s, most scientists thought that the universe was infinite and unchanging. But then it was noticed that the galaxies seemed to be receding from Earth and receding from each other, as if in the aftermath of a big explosion. And it doesn't take much to kind of replay that scenario in your mind and say, well, if they're moving away, there must have been a time in the past when they were all together in a very small space, and that was the beginning of the Big Bang Theory. Now, it turns out that many scientists hated that idea, including physicists, because it seemed to point to an absolute beginning for the world and maybe a creation of the world. And a lot of scientists still hate the idea of the Big Bang. It turns they're a little more subtle about it these days, but they don't like the idea of a beginning because it implies something outside of nature, something outside of the universe is responsible for the universe and its properties. So I view intelligent design in the same way, that it might have philosophical, theological implications, and some people might not like those implications, but it's completely based on empirical data, on the experiments and discoveries of scientists in the past 50 or more years that have shown the sophistication of the very foundation of life. So it's a completely scientific idea, whether you like its philosophical implications or not.